Good day, everyone. Previously, we have discussed the aquatic environment, wherein we tackled more about the water cycle, the hierarchical classifications of the aquatic environment, particularly majorly classified as the oceans or the marine environment and the freshwater environment. And we also learned that the marine environment deals with the study of oceanography, the study of seas and oceans, and the freshwater environment deals with the study of limnology or rheology, deals with the study of rivers and lakes. And further, we also discussed that the limnology is classified further into a Lotic and Lentic environment. Now, today, we will be talking more about the aquatic environment, focusing on the freshwater ecology. So this module will teach you on the fundamentals of freshwater ecology. So the science of limnology, including the Lotic and Lentic series, although we have already tackled some of these fundamentals or concepts of the Lotic and Lentic series, we will also be discussing the types and the origin of lakes, and also the limiting factors in the freshwater environment, as well as the different types of stratification and the corresponding types of organisms in each layer of these stratifications. And so, therefore, at the end of this study, you are expected to discuss the importance of freshwater environment, explain the Lotic and Lentic series, distinguish the different types of lakes, identify the limiting factors in the freshwater ecosystem, as well as explain the context of thermal stratification, and also describe the zonations of the lake, characterize the different organisms in the freshwater ecosystems, and also you're going to classify neustons, planktons, nectons, and benthos. Okay, so those will be the major concepts that you will be focusing on this module. And so, before anything else, so as a form of introduction, here we have the module 4, of course, the module 3, of course, the freshwater ecology. Now, since we are talking about freshwater ecology, we must first learn what are the fundamental backgrounds or principles with regards to the composition of the freshwater ecosystems. So here we have, it is said that only 3% of the world's water is fresh. So all of the 97% is marine water. So only 3% of the world's water is fresh water. And 99% of the 3% of this is either frozen in glaciers and packed in ice or buried in aquifers. So just imagine that 99% of the 3% of the total world's water in the Earth's surface is frozen in glaciers, packed ice, or buried in aquifers. So that's a major amount of the freshwater distribution. So the remainder of this is found in the lakes, ponds, rivers, and streams. So only 1% of the 3% are the waters that came from lakes, sa mga ponds, sa rivers, and streams. So just imagine how scarce are these resources are, and they play a very significant role in the aquatic environment. Now, if you take a look at the distribution of this water, or what we call as the quick view of the planetary freshwater availability, we can see in this figure that most of the freshwater, no, this is the scale basically. The pink ones are the areas which has a very scarce freshwater supply, while the blue ones are the most abundant part of the globe wherein it has a very abundant freshwater supply. So where are the areas that has a very much abundant supply of fresh water? The areas such as the Northern America, the Western Pacific coast of South America, and some regions of Australia and northern this is Africa. So most of the areas in this equator part are are basically scarce in water supply, fresh water supply. As you might have noticed, most of the deserts, mga disyerto, magkita nato diri nga mga regions. Now, sa sunod kung mag-enroll na mo sa inyong subject ng meteorology, you will understand why the deserts are commonly found in these regions. And so therefore, that basically has something to do with the Coriolis force and the rotational planetary rotation and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is the distribution of the freshwater supply in the world. Now, why are we dealing with the freshwater? Because freshwater are the most convenient and the cheapest source of water for domestic and industrial needs. No, we all know for a fact that we do not supply the industry, the domestic areas, the commercial centers with the marine water. No, wala man kita naga-supply og mga marine waters into the malls and the hotels, restaurants, and so on and so forth, the urban areas. We supply them with fresh water. So that is the most convenient and the cheapest source of water, ang fresh water. And secondly, the freshwater components are the bottleneck in the hydrologic cycle. We all know for a fact that freshwater are basically, or freshwater environments plays a very important role in transferring the waters in the phases of the water cycle, right? So from the lakes down to the seas with the channel, from the rivers, streams, and some other channels, and from the seas up to the sky for evaporation and so on and so forth. Okay, so basically freshwater plays a very important role in the ecological concepts. Thirdly, freshwater ecosystem provide the more convenient and cheapest waste disposal system. So basically, these are the three of the major importance of the freshwater supplies in the world. Now, since we're dealing with the freshwater, we will be focusing more about limnology. Now, what is limnology? Limnology basically means that you're studying freshwater ecosystems, no? With an emphasis of understanding the physical, chemical, and biological processes that are basically important in structuring and maintaining the water or the freshwater systems. So we do not just name environments here. We do not just identify the organisms there. But we must understand the physical processes, the chemical processes, as well as the biological processes, which are, all of these three are very important in structuring and maintaining the stability of the freshwater systems, like lakes, rivers, bogs, marshes, swamps. So those areas are very important. So we must understand the physical, chemical, and biological processes. And that's the reason why we will be tackling more about the organisms, the stratification of the lakes, the relationship between the light penetration of the sun towards the temperature of the water, and the organisms that live therein in each of the stratifications or each of the layers of the water. So basically, limnology embraces the three major areas: the lentic waters, which compose of the lakes and any body of water that is non-moving; the lotic waters, which are the moving waters, the rivers, the streams; and also we will be covering as well the estuaries. So it embraces these three disciplines or these three areas in the study of freshwater environments. Okay, so although previously we have already tackled the word lentic, the lotic, and so on and so forth, so this is just a quick overview or a review on the concepts of lentic and lotic environment. So we all know for a fact that lentic come from the derived from the Latin term, which is lentus, meaning to say sluggish. No, in some reference it says it came from the word lenis, which means calm, no, non-moving. refers to all form of inland bodies of water which the water is essentially static. Static meaning to say it is not moving. So there is also a genetic sequence of these units that make up this series. So there is what we call as the succession, right? So succession meaning to say from this type of body of water to the other type of body of water and to the next type of body of water, as long as it is still a lentic environment, meaning to say a non-moving environment. So there is what we call as succession. So succession in lentic series goes toward the extinction with age. What do we mean by that? Extinction with age basically meaning to say from the lakes, kanang mga lakes nga makita nato diha sa atong mga palibot, kung natay mga lakes manggaling pareha sa mainit lake. Mainit lake through time, after decades, centuries, and millions of years, there will come a time that will turn into only a pond, no? Later on, we will differentiate what's the difference between lake and ponds. So puhon-puhon mahimo ra gihapon nagpond. What are the reasons? Unsay mga hinungdan nganong there is a succession? Later on atong i-discuss unsay mga factors that basically drives a certain aquatic environment to grow old, no? So unsay mga indications, unsay mga factors that turns into that type of environment into another type of environment. So ponds could also grow into another type of lentic environment. It will turn into swamps in a very long period of time, no? So this is the succession from lake to ponds to swamp because of the different factors that contributes to the succession. Okay, so here we have the definition of the word lakes, ponds, and swamps. Lakes are larger bodies of water occupying distinctive basins. So basically larger ang mga lakes and are still non-moving, no? Static sila. Ponds, however, are generally suggest small quiet bodies of standing water, usually shallow, enough to permit the growth of rooted plants from one shore to the other. So unlike lakes, ang lakes na siya murag transition nga walay nag-grow nga mga plants in between. Ang ponds throughout sa iyang bottom or water surface, bottom surface sa iyang pinakadalom gyud na gina siya tanan plants. So ponds enable the growth of aquatic plants in all areas of the bottom areas. However, ang mga swamps are a wet lowland which supports the mosses, the shrub, together with relatively large trees. Now, there is also what we call as the marshes, no? Natay gitawag pa nga mga marsh. Unsay difference between marsh and swamps? So basically, the swamps permits the growth of large trees, na iyang mga trees. Ang mga marshes, wala gina siya yung mga major plants. Puros lang na sila mga shrubs and mosses. Mga lower forms of plants lang iyang ginapag-grow. Unlike sa swamps that permits the growth of large trees. Mga major forms of trees or plants. Okay? So those are the definitions of the three, including the definition of the marsh. And here we have, so as I have said earlier, there are factors that causes the succession of a lentic series. So, unsay mga hinungdan nganong ang isa ka aquatic environment will grow old from from lake to ponds, from ponds to swamps. So, these are the three major causes of the succession in the lentic series. So once again, lentic are environments or aquatic environment that are static. Okay? So first is, of course, the gradual filling of lake basins. So we all know for a fact that lakes, ponds, and swamps are the catchments of rivers. No? Sila mo'y mga magkuha, sila mo'y mga catchments, sila mo'y padulungan sa tanan water. So the continuous deposition and accumulation of sediments and other materials into the lake basin. So there will come a time nga kung say for example mag-flood, magbaha. Katong mga sediments, mga materials, mga debris nga maanod sa baha, ma-deposit to siya sa lake. And there will come a time that that lake, instead nga lawom pa na siya, mumabaw gina siya kadugayan because of the gradual filling in the lake basins, in the pond basins, and so on and so forth. So, muna siyang isa ka factor why there are successions. Secondly, the catastrophic events. So, examples of catastrophes that may destroy the lake basins are a great flood that will destroy the lava dam which produces the lake, and earthquake which may remove the basin through uplifting of land surface. So there are catastrophic events, kanang mga tectonic movements, mga flood, and lava. So kana silang mga events basically will cause succession in the Lentic series. Okay? Thirdly are the loss of water. So the loss of water, lake often become extinct because their water is drained away, such as when the outlet stream erodes its valley below the level of the lake floor. A change in this climate may also cause the lake to lose water. Like for example, there is a lake somewhere in the Middle East that dry out because of irrigation for farming cottons. I think if I'm not mistaken, it was Aral Sea, no? If you have time, you can search for the history of Aral Sea. What happened to Aral Sea? Why it turns into a dry lake? Anong na dry lake man ang Aral Sea? So basically, there are agricultural concerns that basically diverts the water from the Aral Sea to the farmlands of cotton farms, no? Sa mga cottons ang ilang gi-grow dito. That's why namayaan Aral Sea. So there are further details on that one in the internet available, no? Inyo lang i-search kung na may time. And since the third factor is the losses of water, no? Ang third factor in the cause of succession in Lentic series is the loss of water. So what are the factors, or how is the water being lost in that particular aquatic ecosystem? So first, the outflow surface streams in drainage lakes. So, ang mga lakes naman gina siya outflow, na gina siya mga outlet paingon dito sa dagat, okay? So, that will be a water loss for them. Another is seepage into groundwater through the bottom of the lake in seepage lakes. So, just imagine kung naay mga vacant undergrounds below that lake, there will come a time that this lake, no, mo absorb and will be deposited on that particular underground. We will term them as aquifers na dayon. Okay, so that is a second factor. Another is evaporation from the water surface, which contributes to a biggest loss in the water loss among lakes. So ang evaporation, especially when the lake is exposed to a very prolonged period of sunlight, no? Paspas kayong evaporation na nangamatay. Except sa mga lakes that are found in the temperate areas, wherein lakes will mostly be covered with ice because of the cold environments. Another is the transition by aquatic macrophytes on the surface. So transpiration basically is, previously we have already defined what is evaporation, how it differs from the transpiration. So transpiration basically is the release of water molecules from aquatic plants. Okay? So here in this example, among lentic environments, the transpiration occur in aquatic macrophytes. So like for example, the water lilies and some other minor aquatic plants living in or thriving in that particular lentic environment, may it be either ponds or lakes, or emerging from the surface like bulrushes and cattails. So transpiration is the fourth factor why there are losses of water from lakes, ponds, and swamps and marshes. Okay, so those are the four factors that causes the water loss in the lakes. So let's proceed now to the Lotic. So Lotic, or the running water series. Lotic came from the Latin word lautus, meaning to say to wash. So since washing man siya, it is moving, right? So moving ang iyang water environment. What are the types of aquatic environment that are considered as lotic? So these are rivulet, brook, creek, streams and rivers. So these are the four factors, no? I mean, some of the types of the lotic environments or lotic aquatic environments. So lotic refers to all inland bodies of water in which the entire body of water moves continuously in a defined direction. So there is really a direction, there is really a catchment area for this lotic environment. So like lentic, lotic environments also have a genetic sequence to the units that make up the series. So rivulet to the brook, down to the creek, and down to the streams or rivers. So the lower it gets, no, from the watersheds, from the high mountains, the lower it gets, the wider the lotic environment it will be, no? So from rivulet, this is basically a very narrow body of water down to the brooks, down to the creeks, down to the streams, and forming into rivers when the streams combine with the other streams. So this is the succession of Lotic series goes towards as well with the extension. Extension with time. Okay? So mas taas siya or mas older siya kung dugay, I mean, mas dako siya kung older siya. Okay? So basically this is the context of the Lotic environment with regards to the succession. Now, if you take a look at the age of the Lotic series, since we're talking about succession, a river's age is based on the extent to which it has a cut, or to which it has cut its valley towards its base level. Now, what is base level? If you can see this figure, no, kining figure dire, this basically illustrates the base level. Okay, so when we define the base level, it is the level of the body of water in which the water flow, that is the sea level or the level of the receiving lake. So this is where ang base level buto sabot in our vernacular term mo na siya ang a level nga ang water mo flow pa in that particular area. Say for example, if the water is already here, would you think that it will still flow down to the sea level? No. So meaning to say it is below the base level. So if it is below the base level, it is older. However, kung higher pa siya diri, kung higher pa ang yaang area, like for example, ang mga freshwater environment are located here sa lake or sa diri somewhere. So since it is still above the sea level, dili pa na siya kaayo old nga lotic environment. So there are also cases that you could adjust your base or local base level based on the nearest lentic environment. Like for example, here in this one, ang lake. So ang lake is the local base level. So you identify the lotic age or lotic environment age with respect to the local base level, which is the lake. So if it is already on the same level with the local base level, it is already an old lotic environment. Okay, so I hope that's clear. And here we have the rivers and streams can be divided along with the 3 dimensions. So you can divide the rivers and streams into according to length, according to width, and according to vertical classification. Okay? So first off is the length. So we have what we call as the pools, the runs, the rifles, and the rapids. So you could observe that rivers mostly kanang mga lawom nga mga suba muna sila ang gipang tawag nato nga mga pool areas of the rivers. Ang mga runs muna siya ang kanang flowing. Rifles basically is faster ang yang rate sa current. Ang rapids basically kanang mga diha ginahimo ang mga water rafting activities, kanang mga sulog kayo nga mga lugar. So that is according to the length classification of rivers and streams. Another classification is according to width. Either it is wetted or active channels. So there are areas that are considered as non-flowing sila, no? Dili sila mag-flow because these areas are basically mostly connected with the river banks. Ang active channels katong naara sa middle nga flowing gid siya perme. And then vertically, you could also classify the rivers vertically as the water surface and the water column, no? There are organisms that thriving in this two classifications of rivers and streams. And here we have also the term riparian zone. It is a transition area between the aquatic and upland terrestrial environments. So you can search more about the riparian zone and how important these zones are with regards to the food chain, the food web, and how organisms rely on these particular zones. Okay, so more about Lotic Series. So there are two major zones of Lotic Series. First zone is the rapid zone. So rapid zone are shallow water where velocity of the current is great enough to keep the bottom clear of silt and other loose materials, thus providing a firm substrate. So kini nga mga areas are flowing gina siya, no? Rapids. Paspas, wala gina siya makita nimo nga mga lapok because ang mga lapok maanod ra. So firm ang iyang substrate, more or less composed of mga stones, mga gravel nga mga kuan, and so on and so forth. And in contrast, we have the pool zone, which is deeper water where velocity is reduced and the silt and other loose materials tend to settle at the bottom, thus providing a soft bottom, unfavorable to surface benthos, but favorable for burrowing forms, nectons, and some cases, planktons. So, kasagaran nga mga rich Lotic series, no? Mga rich, mga rich, mo na ibot pasabot na diverse, no? Daghan mga organisms mag-thrive ana nga mga zone. So kasagaran mga diverse nga environment are located in the pool zone because most of the organisms could thrive and most of the nutrients and minerals and foods and shelters are basically located in these zones, ang pool zone. And here we have, since we were talking about the age, so we must not forget what are the reasons that basically causes the characteristic of succession in the Lentic series. So succession meaning to say katong change from the aquatic environment. Okay? So first off is the mechanical erosion. From the word mechanical erosion meaning to say running water mechanically erodes the land by abrasion, the grinding contact of the builders, the rock fragments, and the sediments. It rolls or carries the suspension against the material from the substrate. So basically, ang there will come a time nga kaning inyong mga sapa, puhon, mulawom pag na siya. Mabaw pa na siya karon pero through time mulayom jaon tungod sa isa ka rason nga gitawag natog abrasion. So that is caused by mechanical erosion, grinding contact of builders and rock fragments. Secondly, through chemical erosion. Rocks that are resistant to abrasion are worn down through chemical erosion. Running water dissolves and carries away the soluble minerals in the soil and rocks it encounters along its path. So there are cases nga kanaganing mga falls kasi karon mga falls are rocky, di ba? Mga batuon ng uban falls. If you have observed ang kanang gibagsakan sa mga falls, ang gibagsakan sa mga tubig gikan sa falls, malayom jaon ang ilaang mga bato, no? Even perminti ra water ang ilaang makaigo sa mga bato, but through time kanang bato malayom jaon tungod sa chemical erosions because water does not only carries water. There are also chemicals on those water coming from the upper zones of the rivers. May it be either from agricultural lands or some watersheds or agroforestry agroforestry lands. Okay, so that is second. So basically, those are the factors that causes the characteristic succession in Lentic series: the mechanical erosion and the chemical erosion. Now let's proceed. Since we're talking about earlier, we're talking about lentic environments. We must understand first what are the origins, no? Origins of these lentic environments. What are the origins of the lake? How does the lake form? Through time or through catastrophic events. So first, most lakes are created by catastrophic events of glacial, volcanic, or tectonic activity. Because of their origins, lakes tend to be aggregated into districts in temperature and subarctic regions of the northern hemisphere. Secondly, most lakes are small or are of glacial origin. So kasagaran ng mga lakes nga gagmay, glacial na ang ilang mga hinungdan, no? Glacial means to say the breakage of the ice, particularly in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, the polar regions. And the date from the Pleistocene epoch of the Quaternary period. So meaning to say these are the these are the second causes or second factor that basically originates a lake, no? Nganong mahimo ang mga lakes, particularly in the upper hemisphere and the lower hemisphere. Third, Great Lakes of North America represent the largest mass of freshwater on Earth, and Lake Superior has the largest surface area of any purely freshwater lake. So these are basically the major lakes that are located or that are found in the world, no? Ang Great Lake sa North America ug ang Lake Superior. Ang Great Lake is the largest mass of freshwater in Earth. However, ang Lake Superior is the largest surface area. Dili siya mo pinaka-large mass tungod kay dili siya layom. Unlike sa Great Lake. And then fourth is Lake Baikal. Contains about 20% of the total volume of surface freshwater and is also the deepest known lake with a maximum depth of 1,620 meters. So yung nga nga mga kalayumon ang present sa lake. So lake basically does not this kind of lake basically does not permit the growth of aquatic plants at the bottom because the light penetration the light from the sun do not penetrate at this depth already. Mga 1,000 meters dili na maabot ang light. And then there are types of lake. First type is tectonic lakes which are formed by movements of Earth's crust. So tanan lake nga nag-originate sa movement of Earth's crust are called as tectonic lakes. Secondly, volcanic lakes, small depressions in craters, explosive origins resulting from lava coming out into contact with groundwater or degassing of magma. We also term them as caldera for volcanic lakes formed by collapse of roof of partial empty magma chamber. So those are volcanic lakes. We have a volcanic lakes here in the Philippines like the Lake Taal, right? Third type is glacial lakes. Most common lake origin due to the erosion and deposition associated with glacial ice movements. So because of sometimes the global warming perhaps, so na yung mga lakes nga ma-form because of the movements of the large blocks of ice in the polar regions. And another is landslide lakes. Lakes formed by rock slides and mudslides. So those are landslide lakes. Fifth type is solution lakes, formed by shallow dissolving of soluble rocks by water, most formed in areas with limestone bedrock. Okay, so solution lakes. Third is fluvial lakes, formed by river activity, no? Kasagaran ng mga river activities like floods and so on and so forth. Ma-form na sila kasagaran dito sa kanang mga lakes by the rivers. And then here we have another type, Julian lakes, formed by the wind activity in arid regions forming dune lakes. Generally, temporary lakes lang sila. Another, shoreline lakes created by at irregularities or edentions along the coastline of large lakes. usually result of longshore currents depositing materials. So na mga lakes ma-form because of kanang mga minerals and substrates and siltations coming from the coast areas or coastal areas. Organic lakes are vegetation and animal like mga caused by beaver dams, no? Kanang mga beaver dams mahimog lake tungod kay kanang mga beaver diha na siya maghimo og mga shelter nila. So dili na maka-flow ang river, and turns out nga na nahimo na siya nga lentic environment because of this vegetation nga nakaharang or animal nga nag-build og mga shelter nila dito like mga beavers. Number 10 is anthropogenic lakes, dams, and excavations by humans. Okay, so obviously. 11, meteorite lakes, crater from meteorite impacts. So those are the different types of lakes. Ano? Mga klase-klase nga mga lakes. Now, I have also there one task perhaps, no, na murag nakahatag og task sa inyo nga you will be required to identify the type of lake, no, namantay top 10 lakes of the Philippines. Ang ako rang gusto is inyong identify kung unsa nga type of lake ang top 5 lakes of the Philippines. So unsa man tong atong top 5 lakes of the Philippines? Those are Laguna de Bay, followed by Lake Lanao, followed by Taal Lake, and then Lake Mainit, and then Lake Nauhan. So those 5 lakes, identify the type of lakes, each of them. Unsa nga klase ang Laguna de Bay, unsa nga klase ang Lanao, unsa nga klase ang Taal, unsa nga klase ang Mainit, ug unsa nga klase ang Nauhan. Okay? So you have 11 choices kung unsa man na siya nga mga klase. Okay? So next up are the limiting factors in freshwater ecosystem. So the major or the very common limiting factor among aquatic ecosystem is the temperature. So temperature plays a very important role in the diversity of the aquatic environment. So since we're talking about temperature, we must not forget the properties, the thermal properties of water. First property of water with regards to temperature is the high specific heat, no? A relatively high amount of heat is involved in changing the water temperature. So 1 gram calorie of heat is required to raise 1 milliliter of 1 gram of water 1 degree into 1 degree centigrade. So this is the property of water where organisms are allowed to adapt or acclimatize in the very sunny day, no? Kung grabe ka high ang sunlight in that particular lentic environment, like for example ang isa ka lake. So kung grabe ka init ang lake, grabe ka exposed sa sunlight ang lake, dili na siya diretso mubukal. Because of this high specific heat, there is a necessary or there is a given time that this particular water could turn into a init nga mga water. So it will give a time to the organisms also to adapt in the changing temperature of the lentic environment. Okay, so that's first. Second property is the latent heat of fusion. The amount of heat energy required to change 1 gram of ice at 0 degrees Celsius into water o liquid water at 0 degrees Celsius, no? Even though wala nag-change ang temperature, mag-change og phase ang water because of this property, no? Wala nag-change ang iyang temperature pero mag-change ang phase from ice to water. Okay? So the thermal process involved is known as melting, and it requires 80 calories of heat per gram. So basically it does not change the temperature but change the phase of the matter or the water itself. Third is this is in continuation. The same quantity of heat is given off to change 1 gram of liquid water at 0 degrees Celsius to ice at the same temperature during the process called freezing, no? In the freezing, gikan sa liquid, it turns into ice. at constant temperature. It is called as freezing. That is because of the property called latent or high latent heat of fusion. Third property in relation to temperature is the highest known latent heat of evaporation. This is basically the heat required to change 1 gram of liquid water at 100 degrees Celsius into a steam at 100 degrees Celsius. This thermal process called boiling or evaporation, and it requires 540 calories of heat in order for this reaction to occur. Okay, so the same amount of heat is released in the reverse process called condensation. So basically, these are the three major properties of water that temperature becomes very important as a limiting factor in the freshwater ecosystem. Okay, so that is the factors that needs to be considered when we understand the physical relationships of the physical non-living environments towards the living environment found in the aquatic ecosystems. Now, if you take a look at the physical profile of the temperature with regards to the thermal stratification, we have here the different layers, no? When we say stratification, it means to say the layering. When we say thermal, meaning to say the temperature. So thermal stratification means the layering temperature of the lake, no? So we have here the epilymnion, the warm water, the thermocline, the rapid temperature change. This is a very rapid temperature change areas. This is a very crucial daily ni siya stable na areas diri. Cold water is the hypolimnion layer, no? So if we take a look at the thermal profile on that one, no, this is in relation to the depth and the temperature. So the shallower the area, the higher the temperature it is. The deeper it gets, the colder the temperature of the layer of the lake it gets also. So the areas here are basically the thermocline. This is where the rapid temperature change occur. Kining diri nga linya. So kini ang atong gitawag na thermocline. What is thermocline? Again, thermocline is the middle portion where the rate of temperature change is the greatest, depending on the light exposure from the sun, depending on the water circulation, depending on the vegetation also. Okay, so those are the three classifications or the thermal stratifications of the lake. Now let's proceed to the thermal stratifications among the lakes found in the temperate regions. In the temperate regions, ang ilang mga lakes dito na ito sila gitawag na spring overturn or mixing. This is where the sun heats the water surface. The wind steers the warm water, which is less dense, down to the depth when the turbulence eventually dissipates. This depth becomes the top thermocline. So, muna siya ang period wherein ang water mag-exchange of nutrients from the bottom towards the top. Okay? So, this is called as the spring overturn. Second is summer stratification. This happens once spring thermocline is established. It is thermodynamically stable and can be destroyed only by cooling of the epilymnion region. Okay, so kung makool na ang epilymnion region, this is basically what will happen. And dissolved oxygen cannot be replenished except by diffusion from epilymnion, which is very low. No, once a lake is stratified, direct heating is all important source of heat to the epilymnion region. So basically kini nga mga phenomenon will occur once a year lang ni siya. Okay, so summer stratification. Now where were we? So those are the two major events that occur among the lakes found in the tropical regions, no? The third one is the fall overturn. This is a phenomenon in the fall. Less solar radiation reaches the lake surface during the day, and heat losses are greater at night. Cooling water is denser than warm water below, so it sinks, forcing warm water up to the surface. This convective current in the wind mixing between the weakened thermocline. So this is where the mixing occurs also. So I have here in the next slide I will be showing you how this cycle occur throughout the year. Okay, so the fourth phenomenon among the cycle of lake with regards to the layers and the availability of nutrients found in each layer, and how these nutrients are being transported from the deep bottom to the upper surface in order for these nutrients to be available for organisms to consume or to grow ang mga plants. So because most of these nutrients are the primary limiting factor among aquatic plants. Ang mga aquatic plants dili man sila maka-absorb og nutrients, or sometimes mahurot ang mga nutrients sa upper surface, and that's the reason why they need the nutrients coming from the below. So fall of return is where the mixing happens. So another one is the winter stagnation. After the fall of return, the lake is homothermos and mixed up to the bottom. This mixing continues until the surface freezes. Ice covers prevents mixing by winds. Freezing occurs when the surface water reaches 0 degrees Celsius and the windless cold at night. So basically, that's the reason why kasagarang mga lake dito sa temperate regions na ilang mga frozen lakes, no? Malakaw-lakawan nila ibabaw sa lake tungod kay nag-froze na sila. Nag-froze na ang surface. That is because of the process called winter stagnation, no? Kasagaran mga cold water environment are less dense. So what happens to the less dense water? It will float, no? Moadto na siya sa ibabaw. Now since the upper surface is cold, no? Permanente siya ginablow sa hangin nga cold, ang environment niya cold, and then at the same time less dense pa siya. There will come a time that particular upper surface will freeze, unaffecting the bottom layers of the lake. So ang ibabaw ra ang mag-freeze kay less dense man siya, nag-dissipate and then turns into ice kay colder man pud ang iyang upper surfaces. Now here is the illustration on that phases that we were talking about earlier. This is the winter. All of the water are basically cold. The spring turnover, wherein the nutrients from bottom will be circulated throughout the layers of the lake. So basically, this is the spring turnover, and then the early summer. So since there will now be sun, ang upper epimnion layer will turn warm, no? Ma-warm ang iyang environment des upper. And then the late summer, higher layers will cover the warm water kay permanente na sila ma-expose sa sun. Even though ang hypolimnion will stay cold environment. So early fall, mas taas pa ang coverage sa warm water, and then there will be a fall turnover wherein the nutrients will again be mixed, and there is what we call as the upwelling, no? Ang upwelling process occurs during this fall turnover, and then go back with the cold environment during winter. Okay? So basically that is the cycle of the physical temperature profile of the layers of the lake among the lakes in the temperate regions. Now, another limiting factor in the lake are the lights, no? Light zonation in lakes. Because of the importance of light for the photosynthesis and respiration, it imposes structure in the lakes both vertically and horizontally. Okay? So there is what we call as the photic zone and the aphotic zone. Photic or euphotic. That is synonymous. The photic zone extends from the surface depth where light is 1% of the incident light at surface. Okay? So 1% light ang iyang incident light at the surface. Basta kay maabot sa sunlight penetration regardless kung lubog or dili. That is the photic zone. So kung lubog ang isa ka environment, more or less dili na kayo makapenetrate ang sunlight dra. And sometimes this turbidity are derived from the diversity of organisms found in that particular aquatic environment. Now, ang aphotic zone is basically areas which extends from the bottom of the photic zone to the bottom of the lake. So, kini nga classification sa light is basically duha lang classification kaganiha. Ang classification, ang zonation sa lake with respect to temperature is tulo. Ang epilimnion, ang thermocline o profundal. Ang kining sa zonations of the lake with respect to light is composed only of two zones, the photic zone and the aphotic zone. So, ang aphotic zone, gikan sa pinaka-bottom nga part sa photic zone towards the bottom part of the lake is the aphotic zone. More or less, kini nga mga areas do not observe photosynthesis. So, wala na photosynthesis or na photosynthesis pero very low because light penetration or the light from the sun does not penetrate on these layers. So they rely, or most activities that occur in these regions are respiration. So respiration meaning to say daghang organisms, less food for them. Okay? So photic zone, basically the photosynthesis and respiration ratio is less than 1. Ang photic zone, basically the photosynthesis and respiration ratio is greater than 1. We also have the term compensation depth, wherein the photosynthesis and respiration is equal to 1. That is equivalent to the thermocline when we talk about the thermal stratification of the lake. Okay? Now, here we have the comparison between lakes and reservoirs. What's the difference between lakes and reservoir? Lakes are natural, no? Naturally occurring. Nagi na siya naturally. Ang reservoirs are man-made. Na dam nga ilang gihimo, na ilang gihimo na mga artificial integration with regards to build some sort of a lentic environment. Okay? Now, if we take a look at the zonations of the lake with regards to the light penetration, this is what I was talking about. No? Kining photic zone basically allows the growth of aquatic plants because aquatic plants could process photosynthesis with the presence of sunlight. Diri nga mga regions. Ang below sa photic zone are aphotic zone, or in the term from the thermal stratification is the profundal zone. So kini yung mga zones are colder and do not have light, and so therefore the photosynthesis and respiration is basically less than 1. Most of the activities that occur in these regions are decomposition, no? Mga decomposing organisms, bacteria, fungi, and some other decomposers are found in the substrate of these regions. So kasagaran diha ng mga region. So kini tanan areas nga naa ang lake surface is gitawag natog benthic zone. Benthic zone is kanang lupa nga area. Okay? So timan-an ninyo na benthic zone. Kining littoral zone is basically the area where most littoral zone basically allows the growth of aquatic plants, no? Dira sa mga areas nga naapay mga aquatic plants mo na littoral zone. Limnetic zone basically is the area more or less kung marine environment ni siya 200 meters dire below, and then to the onwards, oceanwards. Muna siya ang limnetic zone. Ang profundal zone, however, is the colder environment which has no sunlight. Walay light penetration ang dire nga area sa profundal or aphotic zone. Okay, so I hope this illustration gives you an idea on how does the lake are classified with regards to the zonations. Now, here we have, again, the littoral zone extends from the shore to just above the influence of the wave to a depth where light is barely sufficient for rooted aquatic plants to grow. So again, as I have said, littoral zone katong areas nga naalay plants nga mo grow. Ang beyond anang area at the same depth, limnetic zone na siya. Okay? So limnetic zone is again area beyond the influence of the shore bottom or pelagic. Okay? So kini siya nga area beyond the influence of the shore or bottom. So kini ang limnetic. Ang profundal zone are basically areas that has not enough light that reaches, that supports the productivity or the photosynthesis. So kining mga area wala kayo yung mga light or walay light penetration, and so therefore walay photosynthesis mag-occur. So this is the profundal zone, limnetic zone, and littoral zone. I hope that's clear. Now, if you take a look at the water circulation, since we were talking about the layering and how does these nutrients will be available for aquatic plants to grow, because most of these plants will suffer from the limiting nutrients, no? Kung permitted na sila mag-rely sa mga nutrients in this layer, dili gina siya mo'y sufficient. Ngayon ba natong sufficient kayo, okay? Because of the water circulation, all the nutrients from all throughout the lake will be distributed gikan sa ubos kintahay nga mga nutrients will be distributed to the upper surface. Okay? So, what are the factors that causes this distribution or circulation? Partly because of the wind, no? Ang mga wind mag-blow sa water surface, that will also drives the water surface to circulate also. And the surface tension of the water here and the evaporation will occur also here, and this is true to the temperate lakes, no? Mga lakes in the temperate regions where most of the lakes are covered with ice. Katong giingon nato kaganihan kung mag-reach na siya 0 degrees Celsius and will become less dense, it will float in the surface and then turn into a solid in the form of ice. And the wave of action there and the circulation from the epilimnion. So this is the epilimnion basically, which has a characteristic of lighted, warmed, most dissolved oxygen are present here, and the photosynthesis will occur because of the light penetration. And the thermocline or the temperature separation, no? This is where the temperature is very abrupt, no? Paspas kayo ang changes sa temperature during area. And then the pressure and the buoyancy sa epilimnion. Ang characteristic sa epilimnion is cold and dark with a possible oxygen scarcity. So wala kayo oxygen ang mga diri nga mga organisms nga makita nato. And that's the reason why most of the activities that occur here in these regions are decomposition. Mga anaerobic decomposition happens here in this region. Now let's proceed to the classification of organisms based on their position of energy or food chain. No? So we have already done classifying organisms in our aquatic botany. We also classify them as autotrophs and heterotrophs. Now here in aquatic ecology, we classify them into three: the autotrophs, the phagotrophs, and the saprotrophs. Now what kabalo kung kining autotrophs is already familiar to all of you. And kining phagotrophs mo'y lahi og ang saprotrophs. Autotrophs, you will know for a fact that these are producer organisms or autotrophic producer organisms, mga green plants and chemosynthetic organisms, mga microorganisms. Ang mga phagotrophs are basically macro consumers. So from the word phage, meaning to say eat, no? Phage meaning to say eat. Phagotrophs, macro consumers, which are basically primary, secondary, herbivores, predators, parasites, and many other types of macro consumers. Mga ginakaon nila mga big, large organisms. Okay? So these are phagotrophs. Saprotrophs, however, are considered as micro consumers or decomposers. Okay? So these are subclassified according to the nature of organic substrate decomposed. So, mag-classified pa ninyo ang saprotrophs further kung organic substrate ang ilang decomposed sa nature or whatsoever ang ilang gina-decomposed. Organic ba or inorganic ng mga substrate? Okay, so saprotrophs. So, again, Phagotrophs are macro-consumers, saprotrophs are micro-consumers. Now, another classification are ceston. Ceston designates the heterogeneous mixture of living and non-living bodies of organisms which floats or swim in the water. So we classify further the ceston as a bioceston and the bioceston. A bioceston are basically non-living, heterogeneous, non-living bodies of debris that floats above the water. Ang mga bioceston are the living, like the plankton, the neoston, the nekton, and pleoston. So, unsa man ni sila ang mga plankton, unsa man ang mga neoston, unsa man ang nekton, ug unsa ang pleoston. So, we will understand that each. So, first, we have the organisms of inland waters can be classified as follows. So, unsay may mga classes of organisms found in the lakes, the rivers, the ponds, swamps, and marshes. So, unsay mga types of organisms? They can be classified according to habitat, no? So, when we classify the organisms according to habitat, there are organisms considered as the littoral organisms. Littoral meaning to say they are found near the shore of the lake. Okay? Another are limnetic organisms. These are pelagic, thriving in open waters. Katong atong giingon kaganiya nga area, kini kanang mga limnetic organisms dira na sila makitaan, dili na sila mabot dira. Okay? So dira na sila mga pelagic organisms. So mga littoral organisms na dira. Okay? So another is benthos. So these are bottom dwelling organisms. So kung taan nato ilang environment, muni ang ilang mga environment diri sa land areas, mga benthos, mga mollusks, mga clams, mga shells, and some other bottom-dwelling organisms. So, muna sila ang mga benthos. So, kasagaran sila mga microscopic. We could also classify the organisms found in inland waters according to the basis of locomotion. Locomotion meaning to say movement. Okay? So, there are nekton organisms. Ang mga nekton organisms, these are basically organisms that can swim at their own will. Makalihok sila sa ilang kaugalingon nga will. However, in contrast, ang mga planktons, dili sila maka-swim against the water current. Dili sila maka-swim again at their own will. Anod-anod lang sila kung asa sila dadon sa water current. Muna sila ang planktons. Ang nektons are basically the swimmers, no? Maka-move sila. Nektons, example, mga fish, mga mga fish, mga crustaceans, mollusks, and some other larvae, and so on and so forth. Ang mga planktons are basically mga zooplanktons, phytoplanktons. Okay? So, kana sila. So, if you classify the planktons further, what are planktons? Planktons are designates the heterogeneous assemblage of minute organisms that float and drift at the mercy of waves and other water movements and has a limited power of locomotion except for zooplanktons. Ang mga zooplanktons, some of them are able to move. Sila mga gitawag natong mga cilia and flagella. So kana sila ang ilang mode of locomotion for some or for a few of the phytoplanktons, dili tanan. Okay? So muna sila. If you wanna take a look at what are the structures of planktons, muna silang mga estrula sa mga planktons. These are all microscopic. No, kung tanawin mo na sa tubig with your own naked eye, you can just observe them as murag mga abog sa tubig, no? So plankton can be classified further into on the basis of quality, no? The quality of planktons, may it be either a plant plankton or the phytoplankton, or the zooplankton or the animal planktons. So kung plant siya, phytoplankton, kung zoo, animal planktons. So phytoplanktons could further be divided into two. Phytoplankton proper, the chlorophyll-bearing phytoplankton, katong mga organisms nga katong mga planktons nga could able to process photosynthesis and produce their own food, no? Kini sila ang mga phytoplankton proper. Ang mga saproplankton are bacteria and fungi. Katong i-classify kaganiha nga saprotrophs, no? Katong mga microscopic eaters or micro-consumers. Moto sila ang mga isa sa mga micro-consumers. So from the word sapro, they are basically bacteria and fungi. Okay? So those are the two classifications of plankton according to quality. And another classification of plankton on the basis of size is three, no? Macroplankton, mesoplankton, and nanoplankton. Ang macroplankton are basically larger units of plankton visible to the naked eye. Makita niyo muna sila with your own eye without an aid of a microscope. And then another is mesoplankton, the net plankton, secured by the plankton net with number 0.25 self bottling cloth, no? Bolting cloth, mesh of 0.03 to 0.04 millimeters in mesh size. Okay, so muna sila ang mga mesh plankton. How do you classify them? Kung gamitan nimo sila og mga mesh size nga plankton nets, no? Mesh gani uto sabot ka ng mga lungag, no? Lungag sa imong planktons. So kung imong lungag sa phytoplankton is 0.03 to 0.04, na diha ang mga makuha nimo nga mga plankton sana mga mesoplankton. Pero kung ang mga planktons nimo are nanoplanktons, more or less dili nimo na sila makuha using those mesh size. No, gitawag natin sila microplanktons. They are very minute planktons not secured by the net. Dili sila mas secured sa net, mulahos ran sila sa net. They can be however caught using a net smaller than 0.03 millimeters. Okay, grabe na sila kagagmay gyud. Nanoplankton gani. Okay? So those are the three classifications of planktons based on the size. And then another is the basis of environmental distribution. Natay mga planktons found in the lakes, we call them as limnoplanktons. Found in the rivers or running water from the word reo, meaning to say current, no? Rheoplanktons or potamplanktons. And another are pond planktons or helioplankton. Haliplankton are the planktons found in the saltwater environment. And the brackish water planktons are called as hypalmiroplanktons. Okay? So, ang atong nailhan sa nauna, zooplankton gyud og phytoplankton. But there are another classifications of planktons with regards to the environmental distribution. You could also classify them according to the basis of origin, no? Kung asa sila gikan, asa sila nag-originate, no? There are planktons that are locally produced in that particular aquatic environment, no? Kana siya diha ra gina permanente sa lake. Diha ra gina siya gikan nga lake. So we call them as autogenic planktons. However, kung gikan siya sa other localities, dili siya endemic dito nga planktons introduced from other localities, we call that as allogenic or allogenetic planktons. Okay? From the word allo means allow others, no? Others. Auto meaning to say auto, self, nara diha sa iyang kaugalingon area. Okay? So those are the two classifications of planktons based on origin. Another classification is based on the contents, no? Natay gitawag na euplanktons, true planktons. Naman pa uban plankton nga false from the word pseudo means false. Debris mingled with planktons. Mga debris ra sila nga sometimes they can be decomposed of kanang mga debris that attaches to the other planktons. Okay? So those are the contents. And then, the basis of life history. Natay mga holoplanktons, natay metoplankton. Holoplanktons means whole or entire. Okay? So, organisms free-floating throughout their life. So, holo means entire life. Plankton sila. Free-floating sila. Entire life. Ang metaplankton are organized, free-floating at some stage and their stage of their life cycle. So, part lang sa ilang stage, plankton sila. Other parts, kung mag-grow na sila, dili na sila kung depending on the water current. They can already move with their own will. Okay, so that is metaplanktons. And what are the dominant characteristics of planktons? Unsa may timailhan nimo that you can say that the particular organism is a plankton? So, basically, the most dominant characteristic of a plankton is number one, plankton possess no powers of locomotion. They cannot move, no? Most of the planktons, although there are a few that has cilia and flagella, but most of the planktons do not have a power to move. do not have a power of locomotion. So that is a very important thing to note. What are the characteristics of plankton? Another, they inhabit the water column. They do not inhabit ano pa yun? The benthic environment. Dili sila mabot dito sa benthic environment. Dito lagi sila sa water column. Another is that they remain suspended or floating in the water. So dira lagi na sila maglutaw-lutaw, palit-palit sa hangin ug asa sila paliron, and then sometimes they will be carried out with the current and so on and so forth. So that is another characteristic. Another is that planktons are producers and consumers of organic matter. So, for producers, kini sila ang mga autotrophic organisms or autotrophic planktons. Ang mga saprotrophic planktons are the consumers of organic matter. Most of them are bacteria and fungi, mga microorganisms. Mga microorganisms kasagaran mga saprotrophic organisms or saprotrophic planktons. Okay? So we are done with planktons. Now let's proceed to the neuston. So kaganiha ato ang gi-classify ang ceston. Kaganiha ang ceston are composed of a bioceston, the non-living, and the biocystin, which are the plankton, the planktons, no? Classify pa nato ang planktons further. Now let's proceed to the neuston. Unsa man ang mga neuston? I guess ang inyong una while nakaay siguro unsay nang ipanghuna-una about neuston, kaganihan naghatag og example sa nectons. Nectons are basically mga moving or the organisms that are able to move at their own will. So muna silang mga nectons, mga fish, mollusks, and other organisms, crustaceans, no? So what are neuston? Neuston refers to the community of the surface film and uses surface tension for stabilizing their position. Like for example, kining mga water striders. These are considered as the neuston. So kini sila ang mga nagpuyo dito sa surface film sa water. Okay? So again, neuston are the community or refers to the community of the surface film and uses the surface tension of the property of the water for stabilizing their position. So kining mga organisms are examples of neuston. And other organisms, there are what we call as the supraneuston or the epineuston. Those are organisms related to the upper surface film, like this one, the water striders, the water measures, hybrids, whirling beetles, and certain spiders that those live upon the upper surface. So kabantay mo mga damang, ang mga damang dili na sila mahulog sa tubig. So dili na sila mo-unload, no? Maglutaw na sila sa height. Okay? So some of the spiders are considered as epineuston. Okay? So that is one. Another types of neuston are infraneuston or hyponeuston. From the word hypo meaning to say embed, no? Na siya sa ilawom. Other organisms related to the lower surface and those that live beneath the surface films. And some of them are bacteria, protozoa, algae, hydra, and certain entomostrata, and certain insects of larvae and others, and usually submerged. So this is basically a larvae, no? Larvae ni siya sa I think unsa ni siya nga larvae. Well, I'm not sure what larvae is this, but this is a larvae. A stage or a young stage of the life cycle of an organism, no? Dinhi nasa surface, this is the surface basically. So nasa sa ilayom. So nagtawag gyapon nato na sila mga neuston because this is still considered at the surface of the water. Okay? Now let's proceed to nectons. So again, as I have said, examples of nectons are basically the organisms that live or that are able to move at their own will. They do not rely at the water current to move. So examples are fishes, mammals, mga chondrichthyes, mollusks, and some other forms of fishes, mga bony fishes, and some others. Okay, so organisms belong to nectons, shrimps, fishes, inhabitants of the water such as reptiles, turtles, frogs, aquatic birds, gulls, and ducks. So, tanan mga organism nga makamove, muna silang gitawag nato nga mga nectons. Tulo na, planktons, neuston, and nectons. I hope you can classify each of them. And lastly, the benthos. Okay, so ang mga benthos or benthic organism, again, katong atong gi-define kaganiha, These are organisms that live here. Katong makita nato sa benthic environment. Diri sa bottom surface, no? Bottom na gid siya magpuyo. Muna sila ibang tawag nato na benthic environment. Katong makita nato diri sa benthic zone. So benthos ang atong tawagan niya. Okay? So benthos ang atong ang term for organisms that are found in the benthic environment. So again, benthos includes all bottom-dwelling organisms. It consists of the diversified aries, plants, and animals. So benthos gihapon ang mga tawag nato sa mga plants that live in the benthic environment. It includes organisms at the bottom from the uppermost bearing position of the beach to the greatest depth. Okay? As long as if it is a plant, as long as it has a light that could penetrate at that particular depth of the water. And most of the benthos are macrofauna and microfauna, no? May be subdivided according to the mode of feeding into like clams. Ang mga clams are filter feeders. So mga filter feeders nga mga macrofauna, and the microfauna kay mga kuan man sila, mga filter feeders. So mga microscopic organisms ang ilang ginakaon. So microfauna, filter feeders, and deposit feeders, mga snails, no? Mga kasagaran mga deposited materials ang pangkaunon ng mga snails. Kasagaran magkamang-kamang ra sila dito sa ilawom sa dagat, mga ganga. These are basically snails, ang mga ganga. So benthos gihapon na sila. So examples of the benthic community is this, no? Benthic community ni siya. So we have there the black-fingered mud crab, no? Mud crab, benthic organism, kaya naman siya sa bottom. Sea squirts, oyster drill. This is the ivory barnacle, kaya siya. Mga spots of the oyster and some large oyster, Crassostria virginica. And the skelefish that daily mo atong pelagic area, dito rin siya permanente sa bottom. Glassy tube worm, soft-shelled clams, common clamworm, ribbon worm, and hard clams. So, sila tanan considered as benthic organisms or mga benthos. Some of them are macroscopic and some of them are microscopic, no? Ano yung mga microscopic po ng mga benthic organisms? Now, here we have another is phytoplanktons or ophox. Ang mga phytoplankton, periphytons, from the word peri, meaning to say surface. From the word phyton, meaning to say plants. Okay? So, periphyton or ophox. Periphyton organisms, both plant and animal, attach or clinging to stems and leaves of the rooted plants and other projecting above the bottom. So tanan nag-grow sa anang, say for example, isa ka seagrass. And then kanang isa ka seagrass na yung mga nag-grow sa iyang surface sa dahon, sa stem. So those are periphytons. Okay? So kanang mga guso, kanang na yung mga nang-grow diha, ng mga parts that are organisms, dili kanang mga non-living organisms kay basig mga cetaceans lang na sila or lubog. So kana silang mga living organisms na nag-grow from other plants are called as periphyton. We could classify them further into two, no? Natin kitawag ng mga lithophiles. These are organisms attached to stones and other solid substrates, no? Lithophiles ang tawag natin nila. Phytophiles are organisms attached to the water plants or aquatic plants. So examples are kini, no? These are periphytons or ophox. So these are lithophiles attached to the stone. And some other forms of phytoplanktons gitawag natong phytophiles are katong naka-attach sa plants. Okay? So those are examples. Another are argillophile. These are organisms attached on the clay deposits. Argillophile. Katong mga naka-attach sa sand gitawag nato to siya samophile. Ang naka-attach sa soft muddy substrate are pelophiles. Okay? So ang mga pelophiles are further divided into two. First is lithoriophile, which are organisms attached on the stones and other solid substrates. From the word reo means to say they are attached to the stones found in the running waters or katong naay mga current ng mga waters. Okay? So this is basically the compositions of the phytoplanktons or ophox, mainly composed of protozoans, bryozoans, rotifers, annelid worms, insects composed of phytoplankton or periphyton community. A mass of periphyton is likely contain plankton, benthos. However, the plankton are caught and held in tangled attachment forms. Okay? So factors affecting periphytons. Unsa mga factors that affects the periphyton? The water movement could be a factor. Fluctuation of the water level, because there are periphytons that will be flooded during high tide, for example, or during flood. Kung wala na po flood, dili na po sila maabtan og water. So ang ila ang diversity mawala na po dito nga mga areas kay dili naman sila matubigan. And also sometimes chemical characteristics of the environment, because some of the periphytons are very sensitive to the chemical environments present in that particular aquatic environment. And here we have the last one, which are the macrophytes. No, mga macrophytes meaning to say these are plants that are visible to your naked eye. Yung mga dagko ng mga plants na ni sila. These are larger aquatic plants that are restricted to the general vicinity at the shores and the shallow water areas. These are plants that greatly vary in the degree to which they become truly aquatic, no? No, natay gitawag nga lahi-lahi nga klase sa mga plants. Natay gitawag nga submerged, floating, partially submerged, and so on and so forth. Okay, so here we have the different types of aquatic plants, no? Natay diri mga algae, kinipod, or I think these are duckweeds, no? These are water hyacinths, water lilies, and some other types of plants, no? Mga floating. Okay, so there are what we call as microphytic algae, no? Mga microphytic algae like Chara, Nithilia, and other species which form mats either at the bottom or the surface, or some occasions they fill the entire water column, no? Kini sila ang mga microphytic. Ang mga vascular plants either submerged, floating left, and floating or emergent, no? Kini sila mga vascular plants. When we say vascular plants, ato na siyang gi-discuss na una sa ato ang botany, they have a vascular system. Okay? So na sila phloem and xylem. And here we have the emergent. Emergent plants, those are rooted at the bottom, projecting out of the water part of their length. Okay? And floating katong completely floating, wala siya nag-abot sa water bottom. Submerged, these are continuously covered with water, mga seagrass, mga lato. Okay? So kana. And then here we have the 4 types of aquatic plants. So again, upland plants, mga dagko nga major forms of plants. Shoreland plants kini sila tanan. So natay emergent, floating, submerged plants, shoreland plants. Okay, so macrophytes. Zones of aquatic macrophytes are as follows: plants in the beach shore of lake whose roots are enclosed to the ground. And so those are basically marginal, no? Katong dool sa mga beach and shore. And zone of emergent hydrophytes, basically emergent but pasabot dito na siya naka submerged dito sa bottom. And then here we have a zone of floating and hydrophytes. This occurs typically next beyond the lake ward and the emergent zone, and is composed of plant rooted to the bottom, but their foliage float upon the surface of the water. Zone of submerged hydrophytes. Okay, this zones occupies the deeper water beyond the zone of floating plants, extending downward to the depth to which vary with the conditions, but in the average water does not exceed 6 meters. So basically, these are the plants located in the littoral zones, no? Limnetic zones. So why are macrophytes important? Nganong importante na sila? Because higher aquatic plants serves as a breeding place. They could support mechanically for animals like the hydra, the sponges, the larval cases, and some others. They could also serve as food for the animals, no? They utilize inorganic substances that may somehow be toxic to the living organism, to the nectons, no? Shelter or refuge, like abode, no? Or the shelter for most organisms, sometimes for nursery or breeding place, no? 6 is they produce oxygen through the process of photosynthesis. and reduces the effects of wave action by acting as breakers or buffers, no? So sila mo yung nag-prevent. So those are the 7 factors that basically supports that macrophytes are important. And ecological problems associated with macrophytes. Ano sa mga problema kasagaran nga makita nimo sa mga macrophytes that causes them to be depleted or magamay ng ilang numbers in that particular aquatic ecosystem. So sometimes they compete with the phytoplankton for the nutrients and light, no? Kasagaran mag-compete sila sa phytoplankton sa nutrients o sa light. Provide cover such that too many fish escape predation and causes an imbalance of fish population. So kasagaran, they prevent the predation, which is basically the normal the natural phenomenon that occurs in that particular areas. So they provide a hiding place. And then they sometimes interfere with the signing or catching of fish. Like for example, manglaya, unsay tawag ana ni manglaja, manglaya or mangdakop og mga fish. So they interfere in the catching of fish kay naman sila mga masabod man ditong imo ang mga nets. And number 4, cause dissolved oxygen deficiencies by covering the surface and limit the light penetration. So basically, katong mga shaded parts, they do not promote oxygen production because of the shading effect that basically hampers the photosynthesis from occurring. That is basically promoted by the algae and some other microscopic plants. And lastly, they fill the water column and crowd the area of fish, no? Kasagaran wala na areas of fish because they sometimes nagdominate na sa ana nga area. So those are the factors that causes problems among macrophytes. And then here we have the saprophytes, no? Saprophytes are again organisms responsible for mineralizing nutrients from dead organic material. This includes bacteria and fungi, no? If you want to take a look at unsa man ang mga bacteria, unsa man ang mga fungi. So, bacteria are classified further into aerobic o anaerobic. Ato na siyang nagihan sa nauna. Aerobic bacteria are the bacteria that decompose organic matters in the presence of oxygen. Ang mga anaerobic bacteria are bacteria that decomposes organic matters and organic materials in the absence of oxygen. So, kung tanaw nimo ang iyang mga itsura sa mga anak ng mga bacteria, basically natin mga bacteria gitawag og coccus, diplococci, encapsulated diplococci, streptococci, staphylococci, sarnicae, and tetrad. So, kanang mga staphylococcus, ingana ang iyang forma, streptococcus, mga ingana. And then some other cyanobacteria, ingani Spirilla, Vibrio, and some other forms of bacteria are in that forms, no? Muna ilang mga itsura. Okay? So that is for saprophytes or the organisms that decompose organic materials. So maklasify po natin ang mga saprophytes into 3. Autotrophic bacteria, saprotrophic bacteria, and parasitic bacteria. Autotrophic basically are classified into chemosynthetic, photosynthetic, and heterotrophic bacteria. And the saprophytic bacteria are basically the bacteria that ingest and absorb dead organic matter. Ang parasitic bacteria are truly parasitic, no? Within the bodies of organisms that sometimes may cause diseases, mga pathogens, no? And these are the factors affecting the distribution of bacteria. Sometimes they are limited with the light, the temperature, the sedimentation, and the movements of water. So there are bacteria that could not tolerate a higher exposure from the sun. There are also bacteria that could not tolerate a higher temperature. Natay 10 classifications of bacteria in the food hazard considerations, no? Na yung mga halophiles, mga thermophiles, and some other acidophiles. So from the word philes means loving. From the word thermo means high temperature. So, kung ang isa ka bacteria is thermophile, meaning to say, these are bacteria that loves high temperature to grow. Okay? So, another factor that basically affects the distribution of bacteria is sedimentation. Sedimentation meaning to say, ang sediment profile of that particular area or bottom. No? Organic particles are used as attachment to bacteria. Any changes that will affect their distributions. Also, sometimes movements of water, it has a direct effect of distribution to the bacterial composition of the aquatic environment. Now, lastly, could also be factor in the distribution of bacteria are the food supply. No, kasagaran ng mga areas are scarce in foods. So sometimes it will not allow the growth of many bacteria. Other microorganisms. So sometimes they have this competition, and sometimes because of the scarcity of food, they basically become limited in numbers, and sometimes become mawala na sila, no? May extinct na sila in that particular location. Organic matter and bottom deposits. This refer to the nature of substrate, no? Kung sa klase nga substrate ang naa diha, it may be muddy substrate, rocky substrates, sandy substrate, or a substrate that has a very diverse benthic environment or benthic organisms. Sometimes pH could also be a factor, no? High pH favors the growth of bacteria. Kanang mga acidic mga areas are very suitable for organisms that grow on that acidic environment. We classify that bacteria as acidophilic bacteria. Okay? So that ends our discussion on the module freshwater ecosystems. Okay? So on our next module we will be discussing on the coastal environment. So that ends our third module. Now, as a form of your in your task, na mo'y task diri akong i-post diri sa inyo ang Google Classroom. First one, task 7, basically you will be required to expound the 3 reasons why freshwater is important. So that is 10 points. Another is that you are going to compare and contrast the lakes, ponds, swamps, and explain its Lentic series. So when we say compare and contrast, meaning to say, imo siyang tanaw ng iyang similarity, and then after sa ilang similarity between ponds, lakes, and swamps, imong tanaw ng ilang differences. So that is what we meant by compare and contrast. Similarities first and then differences after. And also you're going to explain its Lentic series. Imong i-explain ang succession series sa Lentic environment. Okay, so that is all 20 points as your task 7. Ang imong task 8, you will be explaining each of the different causes of succession in the Lentic series, also 10 points. And then number 4 is explain the different causes of succession in the Lotic series, another 10 points. So you could answer that in a sheet of paper or in that task 8 Word document nga akong gi-send sa inyo, ha. Okay? So that is your task 8. Task 9 would be identify what type of lake are there or are the 5 major lakes of the Philippines. Again, katong gi-mention ako na unsa nga type ang Laguna de Bay, unsa nga type ang Lake Lanao, unsa nga type ang Taal Lake, unsa nga type ang Lake Mainit, ug unsa nga type ang Lake Nauhan. Number 6 will be you will be explaining why temperature and light are the limiting factors in the freshwater ecosystem. Why temperature is considered as a limiting factor and why light is also considered as a limiting factor in the freshwater environment. Okay? And number 7, you're going to explain the graph. So, I have there a graph katong epilimnion, thermocline, o hypolimnion. So, katong tulo ka layers, inyong i-explain adto nganong ang temperature distribution sa kada layer is taglahi. Okay? So, explain. That is your task 9. Task 10 will be Compare and contrast the littoral, limnetic, profundal zones of the lake. So 10 points. Another, compare and contrast gihapon similarities and then differences of autotrophs, phagotrophs, and saprotrophs. And differentiate plankton, neoston, nectons, and benthos. That is another 10 points. So some of you have already submitted one, no? Nanay nag-submit og isa. Diri sa task 9 wala pa nag-submit, diri sa task 8 wala pa. And so with task 7. So if you have any questions, you may chat your questions at our group chat. So for the meantime, please answer your task from task 1 to task 10. I'll see you again on our next episode. Thank you so much for staying in at this very moment. So salamat sa pagsunod. This is basically a 1 hour and 35 minutes nga recording. So salamat sa pagsunod. I hope nga napa may load kay kasagaran sa inyo bago pa nakadawat og TES. So again, thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you again on our next episode. Thank you.